You know, when I want to hear from God, when I'm really struggling or I need to talk to God, I like to go out into nature, right? That's like my place. When almost every significant decision I've made, I've been somewhere that I could go out and walk and just, it gets me away from the noise. My cell phone doesn't work. That's why I make sure I go somewhere like that. That's just my place. Everybody has their different place, right? I know people have prayer closets. People have different places they go. I talked to a guy once who the golf course was his place. He would go out by himself, and it was out in the nature and golfing. That's something he loved to do, and he could just take time to really just spend time with God while he was golfing. And he would always ask for God's help and direction in life as he was golfing. It kind of was a distraction for him while he was listening. So he told me one day where he heard the voice of God on the golf course. That God actually spoke to him. He said he was at a hole that was particularly treacherous. It's one of those ones where water surrounded the green. And if you don't golf, that's not what golfers like to see, right? The ball can easily get hit into the water. So he reached into his bag and he grabbed the new ball, but then he looked out and he thought, I don't know if I want to hit a new ball, right? I don't want to lose a nice, new, good ball in that water. So he grabbed an old ball. And he was really struggling with what to do. Was he going to have the confidence to hit the new ball, or did he just kind of give in and hit the old ball? And God spoke to him. Really clearly, the voice of God said, use the new ball. He thought, you're right, God. I can do this. I should have confidence in myself. I should believe in myself. And he put the tee down with the new ball on it, and he stepped up to hit the ball, and God spoke again. God said, take a practice swing. And he thought, you're right. I need to kind of work the kinks out, make sure I'm going to hit this the right way. So he took a couple big practice swings. Confident, ready, excited to go. And he stepped up to the ball again and put his club down. And God spoke one more time. And very clearly, the voice of the Lord said, never mind, use the old ball. Wouldn't it be great if that's how we heard God talk to us? If just the clear direction, do this, don't do that. God, here's my problem. Just tell me what to do, and I'll do it, right? Tell me which way to go, and I'll go. Give me clear action, clear instruction, clear direction. And sometimes God does that, but usually he doesn't. That's what we want. That's what we desire. But what we find is that in those moments often, when we want the loud voice of God, when we want to hear, the noise, that's not how God speaks to us. The truth is, we have a lot of noise in our life, right? We have a lot of voices that tell us where to go. We have a lot of voices that tell us what to do. We have a lot of voices to tell us who to be, what to believe. They are constant. The people around us, we carry these cell phones with us that are constant distractions, constantly telling us what to do. Whatever videos you watch, whatever news you turn on, it's all telling you what to believe, who to be, what to do. We're bombarded with the noise of this world. And so God's voice, if it spoke, and if he spoke down to us, often would get lost in the midst of the noise that we fill our lives with every day. And so what we find is that God doesn't often speak in the noise. He speaks in the silence, in the quiets. New Eastern philosophy has a saying that silence is the most powerful scream. That these times where we're silent and our lives are silent are the times, let's be honest, when the voices in our heads and in our hearts are the loudest. And we can hear the most clearly. But that's not what we want from God. when we cry out to God, the last thing we're asking for is silence. Elijah climbs up a mountain to experience the presence of God. He has an expectation of who God is going to be, of how God is going to move, of how God is going to speak. And what we find is that God doesn't meet his expectations. He shows up, he meets him there, but he meets him in silence. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves today is, how do we see and know and hear the presence of God in our lives when he doesn't show up the way we expect to see him? Before we answer that question, I want to go to 1 Kings chapter 19. We've been looking at this passage for a few weeks, but I want to go back, and we really looked at what Elijah's thought and what Elijah's done, what Elijah's experienced, and I want to look more at what God does today and how God answers the depression, the despair, the disappointment, the loneliness, all that Elijah brings to the cave on that mountain. How does God speak to it? If we look in verse 9, at this point, verse 7 and 8 have told us that Elijah's gone on this 40-day, 40-night journey. He's fasted through the wilderness. He climbs up Mount Sinai, the mountain of God, the same place that Moses appeared to God. And that's the book of Isaiah. That's not the word I want to read to you today. Verse 9. The Lord says to Elijah, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah replied, "I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty, but the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, and tore down your altars, and killed every one of your prophets. I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too." So God asks him why. We looked at that question, what are you doing here? Because he's in the wrong place. And the key part of Elijah's answer is this: I'm the only one left. I'm all alone. In chapter 18, we read about how Queen Jezebel was killing the prophets of Yahweh. And they're being purged in the land of Israel. And Elijah has to run away. He is alone in the desert, in the wilderness for 3.5 years. And Elijah has to go before King Ahab and challenge him alone. And Elijah has to stand in front of 850 prophets of other gods on Mount Carmel alone. And Elijah runs into the desert alone. And every step of the way, Elijah says, I'm all alone. Nobody's with me. I'm doing this by myself. And even when I do it at the end, it doesn't work. And so I'm done. I quit. I'm finished. Because now that I'm the only one left, they want to kill me too. Was Elijah alone? Of course we know Elijah wasn't alone. But he feels that way, doesn't he? And I bet if we asked ourselves, was God with you through these things? Of course you would say, yes, God's always with us. I'll never leave you or forsake you. And yet there are moments in your life where it doesn't feel that way. Where you feel like you're on your own. And no matter what you do, and no matter how hard you try, it doesn't work. And God doesn't move and work in the way you expect, and so you don't see him there. So God answers Elijah. And it tells us on verse 11, "Go out and stand before me on the mountain." And as Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by. It's the same exact words that are used of when Moses stands on the mountain. And remember, Elijah came there expecting God to move, just as he did with Moses, and God does it. God moves, just as Elijah expected him to, but he doesn't show up the way Elijah expects. Because it says, the Lord passed by, and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. That's the ways that God showed up to Moses. He shows up in power and might. He shows in a way that the very ground shakes, the mountains begin to fall apart, that fire falls from heaven. That's how God showed up for Moses. And if we're honest, it's the same way that God has already shown up for Elijah, hasn't he? Elijah didn't bring fire from heaven on Mount Carmel. Elijah didn't make it not rain or rain. God has already shown up in this way. And yet it tells us that these things happen, but the Lord was not in them. The way Elijah was expecting God to speak and move and work in his life is not the way that God showed up that day. And how many times do we think that this is the way God's going to work, and when it happens, when it moves, it doesn't end up the way that we think it's going to? But then, after the fire, there was a sound of a gentle whisper. If we translate the Hebrew directly, it says there was a brief sound of silence. After the storm passes, after the earth shakes, after fire falls, there's nothing. It's quiet. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. That's the sign. Remember, look, it doesn't say and God was in that, right? But that's how we know God was in it. When God shows up, this is how people respond. They cover their face because they can't handle what they see. Moses did it when he stood in that same cleft in the rock. Isaiah did it in the passage we read in Isaiah 6, when just from seeing the train of God's robe, he covers his face. In the silence, God was in that. Now, we read that and we say, well, that's how God speaks then, right? It's through this gentle whisper. But God is not trying to teach Elijah how to hear the voice of God. Elijah already knows that. Why did Elijah go to King Ahab in the first place? Why did he go to Kerith Brook and be fed by ravens? Why does he go to Zarephath? Why does Elijah do all these things? Because he already knows how to hear the voice of God and take his direction. This is not a lesson in how to hear the voice of God. Do not take it that way. Because sometimes God speaks in the storms, and sometimes he speaks in the fire, and sometimes he shakes the earth. And we see throughout Scripture, God do powerful, mighty things because God is mighty and powerful. But that's not always how he speaks. What's the lesson then to Elijah? What is he trying to tell Elijah? See, Elijah saw the fire fall from Mount Carmel, and Elijah felt the storms come and the drought end, and they didn't end up the way he thought they would end up. And so he thought God wasn't in that. God wasn't working. Jezebel still has power. My life's still threatened, but all's still worshipped. Everything's still the same. But sometimes we see God not in the storm, but in the quiet after. Now, I'd been a pastor like 2 months when 9/11 happened. And the question, if you lived through that everybody asked for a minute was, where was God? Where was God when that happened? Where was he when those planes hit? It's the question we ask all the time when those kind of things happen in our lives. When we hit these moments of struggle, when we're in despair and depression like Elijah was. And so we're looking in that moment, in the storm, in the tragedy, in the windstorm, in the fire, in the earthquake, we're looking for God there, and God wasn't in that. But he was there after. And we saw him save lives in rubble. We saw him bring together a divided nation. We saw God do things in the after that only God could do. Sometimes he's not in the storm, he's in the quiet afterwards. And we're looking for him to show up and do these mighty things in the midst of the hardest moments and the hardest times. And God is not saying he's not working. He's asking Elijah, trust me. You can't see it. You're not looking in the right place for it, but I'm there. And I'm working in ways you cannot see, and I'm doing things that you have no idea about. But Elijah can't see that. Why? Because I'm all alone. I'm the only one that's fighting for God. I'm the only one doing anything for him. And so God asks him again the same question. End of verse 13. What are you doing here, Elijah? And Elijah replied again. Notice the word again. It means he says the same thing. I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty, but the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down your altars, and killed every one of your prophets. I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. And then the Lord told him, go back the same way you came, and travel to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you arrive there, anoint Hazael to be king of Aram, and then anoint Jehu, grandson of Nimshi, son of Zaphat. Skip forward. And to be king of Israel, and anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, from the town of Baal-Maholah, and to replace you as my prophet. Anyone who escapes from Hazael will be killed by Jehu, and those who escape Jehu will be killed by Elisha. And yet I will preserve 7,000 others in Israel who've never bowed down to Baal or kissed him. So after all that, he experiences the presence of God. God asks him the same question. Elijah gives him the same exact answer. Because even though he's seen and known the presence of God, he stood as God passed by, just as he wanted him to. He still thinks he's all alone. He still can't see what God is doing. He still can't trust that God is moving. So God pulls back the curtains to say, here's what I'm doing, Elijah, that you can't know about. I want you to go to Aram. Now, I want you to understand, when God says anoint, he's not actually asking. It sounds like he's asking Elijah, go do this, anoint. Elijah doesn't do that to any of them. None of these people are anointed. Prophets don't get anointed. That's not a thing for prophets. The word anoint, though, is about the successor, what's coming next. And so God is saying, I want you to pass this torch on. Here's what's going to happen next. In Aram, which is another country that Elijah has no concern for, God says, go there, and there's going to be a new king there, Hazael, and he's going to wipe out Baal worship there. And so God is saying to Elijah, I'm even working in places that you aren't even looking for me working, that you don't think I'm going to do anything. You don't think I'm going to wipe out Baal worship in Israel. I'm not. I want to wipe it out everywhere. I want to show everyone that he's not God. I'm going to work where you don't expect. And then I want you to go find Jehu, who's not Ahab's son, who's not Jezebel's son, who's not of the line. I'm going to start a whole new line of kings in Israel. I'm going to wipe out their connection to my people. And then, excuse me, I want you to go find Elisha. And he's going to succeed you. He is going to fill your shoes. And what is God saying? Elijah thinks he's going to go to Mount Carmel and he's going to finish it. I alone am the hope of Israel. I'm the only one fighting. I'm the only one doing anything, and I'm going to end Baal worship. And God says, no, you're not. You're not the hope of Israel. I'm the hope of Israel. And the truth is, well, God has worked in mighty ways, and God does powerful things throughout the history of his people. It's not these great, mighty miracles that change the course of history. It's the hearts and lives of men and women who are committed to following him and his will that change the course of his people far more than any grand miracle does. The miracles remind people of who God is, but it's what people do in faithfulness and obedience to the will of God that changes the world. And he's telling Elijah, you're not the only one. It's not even just Hazael. It's not even just Jehu. It's not even just Elisha. I've got 7,000 other people. who are in the same boats, who are going through the same thing. This is how God works, not just with Elijah, but throughout the story of his people. He's working in the quiet, behind the scenes, in the ways people can't see or expect or understand. And that's not just true in the Old Testament. That's not just true with Elijah. Think of the story of Jesus. Did Jesus come with fire and earthquake and windstorms? He could have. He could have came and sought to wipe out every enemy of God, every oppressor of his people. He could have came with power and might and got rid of them all, but he didn't do that. In fact, they put him on the cross and they said, cry out, call for the heavens to come help you. And what does he do? He's silent, as a sheep led to the slaughter. And it's in his silence on the cross that God speaks most loudly to us. Far more loudly than any angels he could have called from heaven and any fire that he could have brought down. It's through his silence that we see and know the love and grace of God in Jesus Christ. He didn't come in the way people expected, did he? But God was working in ways that people couldn't see and couldn't know to accomplish his purpose and his will. So at the end of the journey, Elijah keeps saying he's alone, but he was never alone. God was present in the drought. He was present in the fire. God was there throughout everything. God was present even in the silence when Elijah couldn't see or know or feel him. God was there. And you might feel that way today. You might feel alone today. You might feel overwhelmed today. You might not see or know where God is in your life, but the same truth is there for you. You are not alone. So how? We come back to the question, how do you know the presence of God in your life when you can't see it where you expect to? You have to recognize that God is working. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. When Elisha didn't see God's grace, if he looked back, it had been there the whole time. The presence of God's grace was with him when he was under that broom tree. The presence of God's grace was with him when he sent a messenger to give him rest, to make him food, to give him strength for his journey, for a journey that, by the way, that God didn't even call him to take, that he chose on his own. God was still in his grace present with him in that. The presence of God's grace was there on that mountain where Elijah decided that God was going to show up. The presence of God's grace was even there in opening Elijah's eyes to what he was doing, to the things that were happening that Elijah couldn't see or know. Elijah didn't recognize that God was working because God wasn't doing what Elijah wanted him to. But God had a plan to end Baalism. It just wasn't Elijah's plan. So we understand this. We begin to recognize, we say to ourselves, where is God? God is not working. The answer is, he's not where you're looking for him. So start looking somewhere else. And recognize all the things that he's doing, even in our selfishness or unfaithfulness or our loneliness, the ways that his grace is still present and powerful in our lives. When you can't see him there, when you don't recognize him where he's at, recognize him where he has been. Which leads to the second thing. Look for him in your past. Why is Elijah on this mountain? Because God showed up there for Moses. And so he said, if God's been there before, God will be there again. Elijah is pursuing the presence of God in a place that God has shown up before. And what we see is God honors that. God gives him that. He showed up and he fixes Elijah's expectations. Gives him a new purpose and a redirection. This dramatic act of power was not they were reminiscent of Moses, but they're also reminiscent of the ways that God had already been present in Elijah's life. And God is showing them, I can still do all the things that I've already done for you. But on this mountain, it's more than just God's presence. Understand, Elijah knew on this mountain, God had established a covenant with his people. And more than anything else, Elijah desires God's people to restore their covenant with him. Elijah's not looking for a new future. He's looking for the people to return to the past, to go back to their faithfulness, to go back to following God, to turn back to him. So here's what this means for you. If you don't hear anything else today, hear this. The Bible tells us that Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. What that means in a real simple way is that God never changes. And if God never changes, what that means for you is this. If you have known God for one moment, at any moment in your life, then you know him right now. Because he's the same for you right now as he was then. If you've known God in his healing at some point in your life, he is still that healer now. If you've seen God move in his power, he can still move in his power now. The same God who delivered you from your struggles, from your fears, from your depression, that is your God today. If you've seen him and known his love in any moment, look back to that. That's who he is in your life today. And that's who he always will be. And as Elijah pursues the ways that God has shown up in the past, he's reminded of who God is for him in that moment and then in his future. And then God gives Elijah a new purpose. Elijah comes looking for God to work in the ways that Elijah wants him to work. And what has Elijah done? He's fled, right? He ran away. I'm afraid, my life's threatened, this isn't working out, this situation here, the whole Jezebel ordeal, not panning out the way I wanted to, I'm moving somewhere else. And I want you to look. What is his instruction? It's the one thing that God tells Elijah to do. Go back. Go back where you were. You were never in the wrong place to begin with. I had worked your life to be where you were in that moment, and I never told you to run away. So go back. Go back to where I'm moving. Go back to where I'm making history. Go back to where I'm changing people. Even though it's not happening the way you want it to, even though it's not happening in the timing that you wanted to, even though it's not happening where you wanted to, go back to that. Elijah came saying that he was all alone, but God said, you have a new purpose in a familiar place. I'm going to give you a new purpose in the same place with new people. And he sends him back to anoint new kings, to repair broken covenants, to anoint new prophets, to repair a broken prophet. He has a new purpose. Not to purify Israel, but anoint those who will. Notice God says, you've done your work, Elijah, and then Hazael's going to work. And guess what? He's not going to do it either. And then Jehu's going to come behind him, and he's going to take out more of them. And then whoever he doesn't get, Elisha's going to get. And one by one, I'm going to continue to use new people to purify this land until I'm done. And your purpose is not to finish it. Your purpose is to get it started. That's where you'll find your purpose. Go back to what God has called you to. Elijah knew where he was supposed to be the whole time. And he was where he was now because he left what God had called him to pursue what he wanted. And in doing so, he fled the presence of God. He fled the work of God. He fled where God was moving and working. He fled the purpose that God had for his life. And God is saying, return to that. Return to your first love. Return to the joy of your salvation. Go back to the one who gave you purpose in the first place. Move your life to where he is. Move your life to where he's working. Move your life to where he's moving. And in finding that, you'll find your purpose. because you'll find the presence of God there. Now, as I thought about this the last few weeks, I remembered back to, I've talked before about how my youngest son, Zeb, he had some surgeries when he was an infant. And when anytime you have a surgery, they have to tell you all the bad things that could happen, right? It's part of the job. The risk might be minuscule, but they have to tell you anyways. You're going to go under anesthesia. These things are going to happen. That's terrifying enough when it's you. But when it's your 6-month-old, and they say, hey, the chance is small, but there's a small chance that you're going to hand them to me, and I'm never going to hand them back to you. It's not the most enjoyable experience. And some of you, I'm sure, have been there. But I remember after he went into surgery, and the surgery was hours long. It was a long day. We went to the waiting room, and it was this huge waiting room, and there were lots of people there. But I'm going to be frank, I don't remember who was there. I know my wife was there. I think there were other people that came with us, but I don't remember. I don't remember anybody else being there. I was surrounded by all these people, and I don't remember anything I thought, anything I did. The only thing I really remember is I stared out a window because they were building a new wing to the hospital, and they had these big cranes moving these big beams, and I just remember thinking, I want to be there. I don't want to be here. Because in that moment, in this room full of people, I felt utterly alone. I felt like nobody could understand what I'm going through. Nobody could understand what I'm experiencing right now, which was insane because my wife is right next to me, literally going through the exact same things that I am. But I still felt it in that moment. And the surgery was over, and we went to the recovery area, and I remember holding Zeb. He was on fire. He was so hot. And I never wanted to put him down. It didn't matter that he was that hot. But as we were sitting there were a bunch of adults in the recovery room, and we were in a children's hospital. And I thought it was kind of weird. And I started to ask questions like, why are they here? I was almost like offended. Like, you're supposed to be taking care of my son. Why are these adults here taking up the care? So eventually we had the opportunity that we asked about it. Why are these people here? And we were told that in that hospital was the only hospital with a burn ward. Anybody was a burn victim, no matter how old they were, this is where they had to go to get help. And I remember in that moment, it was like a veil was lifted from my eyes. And I began to look around and I see all these adults, and now I know why they're there. And then I began to see all the other kids and all the parents holding them, just as I was holding my son. And I began to recognize that I was never alone. I felt that way. But I was surrounded by all these people going through the exact same thing that I was going through. And I want you to notice that in that moment, absolutely nothing changed. Nothing was different. Surgery was still the same, weight was still the same, recovery is still the same. All of it's still the same. The only thing that changed was my perspective. How I saw the situation that I was in. The same with Elijah. He isn't changing everything around him because Elijah feels isolated and alone. God is trying to change how Elijah sees what he's going through and what he's experiencing. And God does it this way. It's that last verse. It almost is like a throw-in. It doesn't really fit. It doesn't really explain God's plan. But God opens Elijah's eyes and says, there's a waiting room full of people. There's 7,000 people just like you. Now, Israel's a nation of over 1 million people. So 7,000 is not a lot. But 7,000 is a lot more than one. You're not in this alone. And so at the end of Elijah's struggle, at the end of his journey to seek and find what God is doing, I want you to hear that. It's the message that God is giving through the silence. You are not alone. It's not just that he's with you, because he is. And if you allow your eyes to be open, you can see and know his presence and how he's working in your lives. You are surrounded by people going through the same struggles that you are, by people feeling the same pain, the same disappointment, the same sins, the same heartaches, the same illnesses. We are not created to live in this life alone. God has given us this gift of each other. So stop living like you're alone. Embrace the 7,000 that he's put in your life, that he's surrounded you with, that are here to walk that journey with you, to encourage you, to pray for you. I promise you, if you've been here one time, there are people here that you don't know who have prayed for you, who have lifted you before the throne of God, who care about you and love you, and you have no idea who they are. And you might be struggling in silence, alone, when you don't have to be. You are not alone, no matter who we are. God was and is and always will be our real hope. Elijah thought he was the hope. I'm going to change everything. I'm going to change my life. I'm going to change Israel's life. But he was never their hope. God alone was their hope. And it's when we begin to see his presence in our lives, when we begin to recognize the things that he's always done, when we begin to see that remnant that he has raised up around us, it's then we'll begin to see the hope that God has always had for us and for his people. I'm going to ask the worship team to come forward, and as they come forward, we sing this closing song. Elijah thought he was alone, and God showed him that he never was. In the silence, in the waiting, in the fear, God was always present. Not just in Elijah's life, but in the lives of the faithful remnant surrounding him. The 7,000 felt alone, and they're hiding in fear too. The truth is, their hope was never found in being strong enough. Their hope was never found in being brave enough or faithful enough. Our hope is found in God alone. Just as God was calling Israel to trust in him alone, he is calling us today to put our hope, our faith, our trust, our lives in him alone. And so let's stand together and let's sing this song, that it is in Christ alone that our hope is found. And in your loneliness, in your fear, in your despair, in your lostness, whatever it is you bring here today, hear and know the presence of God that's in your lives, that is your hope, that will lead you to where you need to be. Find your hope in him alone today.